I'm writing to you, Sugars, because I am feeling a weight of guilt being her child. I'm 24 years old and attending graduate school in California while she and my family are in Kentucky. I'm studying acting, pursuing what I love, and fortunate to be performing with a great company this summer. The drawback is I won't be home until August, in which I'll stay for a month, and then it's off to California again for my final year of training. I feel incredibly selfish, Sugars. I am trying to grow and pursue what I love, and yet I feel I'm abandoning the person whom I love. Not only do I feel selfish, I also feel fake. Every time I come home, my parents ask about women I'm seeing. The truth is, it's not women I see or seek, it's men. I'm gay and open to friends and new acquaintances about my sexuality, but family is different. I've grown up hearing harsh words about how they view us. It has been the biggest struggle and secret of my life to be the thing my family shows the least respect for. As I mentioned, I'm an actor, and trust me, this has been my hardest role to portray. I want to be honest, and I want my mother to truly know me for who I am, but is now the time. I dread the thought that should she pass away, my life to her, the one she gave me, would have been a lie. How do I handle these things, Sugars? How do I handle this guilt? Much love, Guilty One.
Guilty One. I think that there's so much in your letter that I think you're telling us what you know you want to do. And that is be honest with your mother.
Yeah.
I mean, what exactly does Guilty One feel guilty about? Is it not being by his mother's side every day of this disease, or is it feeling like that he's, fake with her? Two
it's
things.
Both of those things.
Okay.
There is a really intractable internal conflict in both of these separate questions. I truly want to pursue what I love, and I'm doing what I was born to do, my calling, which I think my family, especially my mother, should be proud of and want me to do. And yet she is ill, and I want to be with her and offer her support. Those are two conflicting desires within you, Guilty One. And the same thing applies to wanting to be honest with your mother and tell her who you truly are so she knows. And also the fear that that will disappoint her and will cause her anguish at a time that she's already battling this terrible illness, and maybe even unconsciously, you might kill her. That the disappointment or grief she might feel about this will just make it worse. That's really a very real fear. But you have to listen to yourself a little bit. I want to be honest, and I want my mother to truly know me for who I am, but is now the time? To which I immediately thought, well, if not now, when?
Right.
Death is a deadline, and it may even be an assignment. We only have a limited amount of time. And, I think it's great that you're spending a month with your mom. That's fantastic. There's a limited time horizon. It is a good and necessary thing that it shifts your priorities. And that doesn't mean don't pursue your dream. You need to do that. And a good parent actually wants you to do that. But it does mean it's a good thing that you're going to be there for a month. And as painful and difficult as it might be a good idea to discuss with your mom, quite frankly, when is it important for me to be there? People get uneasy talking about it because always that shadow of death is looming. And is it going to happen? And when could it happen? What can we save? How long? The other thing that's difficult for you, Guilty One, is this is quite uncertain. You really don't know what your time horizon is.
Right.
But what's very clear is you love your mother, and you want to be there for her and support her. And so you have to be open with her both about her illness and what she's facing and when she wants you there and when it would be meaningful. And as Cheryl and I are suggesting, who you really are. The fear you have is very real, that it will disappoint her and cause her anguish. And that's a real fear. But your underlying desire to be known and loved and accepted, I think, takes precedence. Or I should say, I think you think and know deep down it takes precedence.
On the second issue, I really feel pretty clear that we don't save people from us by pretending to be someone we aren't. Now, obviously, this is really complicated because you have a family who essentially hates homosexuals, but they love you. And in some ways, this can be a really clarifying moment.
Right.
Finally showing yourself to them in this moment when it might be the last chance you have to show yourself to your mother.
Right.
And I think that one of the most important questions, perhaps the only important question to ask when you are considering coming out to a clearly homophobic family, is, are you putting yourself at risk of harm? And sadly, many people do. Teenagers who come out to a homophobic family risk all kinds of abuse, psychological, physical, and so forth. And, in that case, I do say, okay, we need to maybe think about this and be careful with this. But
Yeah.
I think, guilty one, in your case, think of it this way. You already know that your parents don't, quote unquote, approve of homosexuality. You've already been rejected sort of categorically. Okay, they don't know specifically yet that you're gay, but they have a lot of hatred and disregard and disrespect and disgust with people who are gay. And so you've already been the recipient of that ignorance and sorrow and ugliness. Okay, you've already received that. They don't know that you've received it, but you know. So one of the things that coming out to your mother offers you is the opportunity to see at least this woman possibly change her mind.
Right.
So let's say, worst case scenario, she says to you all the things she's said about gays all your life. Okay, this is not going to be a surprise to you. It will hurt your feelings, but it won't devastate you. You already know that that's how she feels.
Yeah.
What if she does something else? What if she looks you in the eye and says, I love you anyway? So you're opening yourself up to the surprise of beauty.
Right.
And love and acceptance. And I don't know that that's going to happen. Nobody can guess that.
Right.
But what I'm saying is, we already know what the other thing is.
Yeah.
And if you do stay silent with your mother, in some ways, that's the end of that story for you. Your mother will go to her grave having been that person.
Yeah.
And, so I really feel pretty clear that you will do no harm to yourself by coming out to your mother. Even if she does reject you, you spoke your truth, which is really powerful.
Yeah, as I was turning this letter over in my head, I was just listening to this beautiful song by a songwriter named Greg Holden called Kissing Boys in the Street. And, he's basically singing about realizing he's gay as a young man, kissing boys in the street, having his father being humiliated and angry at him. And then, the dad evolves a little bit as he gets a little bit older, but he still disapproves for less morally judgmental reasons, maybe more concern. And then as the dad is on his deathbed, he realizes, this is who you are. And it wasn't the way we thought of the world when I was growing up, but I see that. And he says, keep kissing boys in the street. And it's like almost brings me to tears when I hear it, because it's this kind of universal dream of acceptance, and that love becomes more important than whatever biases we have. And I mean, you don't know what people are going to be like as they're dying or as they're facing death, because death kind of scrubs us of a lot of the lesser defenses and the crap we carry around, the vanities and the bigotries, or at least we have the hope that it will, that it kind of brings things down to their base. We can't say how it would turn out, but I think it's a risk worth taking, would be the way that I would put it. And I think for the reason you ultimately stated, which he needs to let her know who he really is, or he's going to feel that whatever love she gave him she didn't have the full sense of who he really was. Maybe in the end what we want is to just be known for who we really are by the people we love. And, that's, I think, the undercurrent of this letter. Right.
So we have a really interesting guest who might be able to give us some insight into Guilty One's question. George Hodgman is the author of the memoir Bettyville, in which he tells a story about going back to live with his mom. Let's give him a call.
Hello?
George?
Yes.
This is Cheryl Strayed. How are you?
Oh, well, I'm so happy to be talking to you.
Oh, thank you. I'm so happy to talk to you. So I'm here with my co-host, Steve Almond.
Hey, George.
Hi, Steve.
We thought that we would ask you to weigh in on this letter. And we know, in Bettyville, you tell a story, obviously not exactly like this, but you have some things in common. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what you went through with your mother.
Well, I lived in New York for about 25 years. And I am from Missouri, a small town called Paris. And I moved back to Paris to help out my mother. And as I stayed, gradually it became very obvious that she was suffering from dementia, and then she developed cancer.
Mm.
And I've been here almost 4 years.
Wow.
And I guess, the real story of Bettyville, though, is not so much what happened to my mother, it's what happened to me,
Right.
this person who, I was an only child. I lived in New York. I was, the king of takeout food. I didn't have a pet. Couldn't keep a plant alive. I didn't really see myself as a very effective caregiver. And so much out there is about saintly women and saintly mothers, and we're not very saintly. We're just kind of, we're very human here.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about coming out to your mom and, sort of how this letter from this younger guy might resonate with you?
Well, it resonates with me a lot because my mother is Depression era. She's 92 now. And I think that she wasn't raised to talk about personal things very much. She lived in a town of 1,200 people. There aren't really gay people here. If they're here, they get out quick. And so I wasn't raised really with the kind of communication skills or, the understanding that made it easy to come out. This young man, I don't know all about his situation, but I sense that a lot of times with all of us who have this trouble, I think there's still so much sense of disappointing one's parents.
Mm-hmm.
And he obviously, in this letter, he feels a very strong affection and pull towards his mom. It's not that there's some kind of resentment.
Right.
What I get from the letter is a sort of a fear of making her sad,
Right.
of making her unhappy, particularly now since she's facing cancer.
Right.
Right.
And I was an only child, and I carried the whole, burden or hope of my parents' expectations. And he's an actor. It sounds like he may be in a situation where his life and his whole, way of being, he's artistic. He may be from a family that just is different from him in every way.
Mm-hmm.
That's a hard bridge to cross. A real heavy-duty cultural divide here.
Yeah. How old were you when you came out did you come out to your parents or just your mother, or can you tell us about that?
We sort of skirted it. They knew. My father found me with a boyfriend once. He didn't say anything at all. I had someone in my life. They kind of ignored what was a fairly obvious situation. I tried to make references at various points. And, what I got from my parents for the longest time is, we don't want to know.
Right.
And also the sense of, this is very hard for us to speak about.
Right.
And so by the time my mother and I actually, had the conversation, I was 40 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He's younger.
That's right.
In the letter.
Right.
And doesn't have that time.
And the letter writer, Guilty One, talks about how his family is explicitly homophobic and they say ugly things about gay people. Was your family like that, or was the homophobia just a more kind of unstated fact?
I wouldn't call it homophobia because that, in my family at least, that implies, I think, an active antagonism almost.
Mm-hmm.
I would say in my family it was, this sounds more pejorative than I mean it to, ignorance. It was just a complete lack of exposure. Now, in terms of the part of the world where I grew up, there was certainly homophobia.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that in a family like his, coming out is, it's terribly, terribly hard.
Yeah.
And we think that this situation is rare now, but it's not.
Right.
And, you look at the number of kids who are committing suicide.
Yeah.
And very often, the mother may have one attitude. The father, in my family, I think my parents, a huge disappointment for me was when I found out my parents had never been able to discuss it. between the two of them.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, that really made me sad.
Yeah, so this is an omerta. I mean, every family has their own kind of code of silence, but
Right.
this is a code of silence. It's not that
What a good word.
right, because it's literally almost at that level. You
Yeah.
you just don't speak of it. Whereas the guilty one is struggling with, and I think George is wise to point this out, he has a good and loving relationship with his mom, which he fears is going to be put in jeopardy because there's no omerta in that family. There's harsh words about people who are gay. So he knows, in a sense, that coming out is going to pit her love and devotion to him against her family culture and her dogma. There's no way around that.
George, do you think that guilty one should come out to his mother?
I think that there's not an easy yes or no answer here. I think he has to really keep an open heart and kind of go with what the situation gives him. I hope he does, because I think that lack of acceptance is something that, in my experience, you really do have to deal with them. You know, you have to get this kind of affirmation from your parents. It's very important. But what I feel, is like, if you're gay like he was and you're growing up in this very hostile situation, he's obviously absorbed so much. He has so much internalized homophobia himself, which, exacerbates the situation so much. I mean, it's almost like Stockholm syndrome. You come to identify with your captor, and he's in a situation where he is thinking entirely about her feelings and not necessarily his needs.
Right.
Yeah.
When you had that honest conversation with your mom, finally, how did that feel, and what was that like? Did it change anything for you?
Well, my mother's first reaction was, well, you'll go your way and I'll go mine. That's what she said. Anyway, it wasn't funny to me at the time because I thought she was very much separating from me. And
Right.
I think that there's not some, eureka, I feel better, because we went back, there was the conversation and there was decades more of silence. But at least I know I did it. I think there's something to be said for knowing you did it.
Yeah, I picked up in Guilty One's letter this sort of pressing need to tell his mom the truth, even though he's afraid of it. He also really clearly doesn't want his mom to die without her knowing really who he is. And, this huge part of who he is secret to her. So I thought, that was interesting. I mean, I have to say, when Steve and I discussed this letter before we called you, that was my first impulse, is that he knows what he wants to do. He wants to tell her.
Well, then I think it's very clear he should tell her. But I think he also really needs to manage his expectations.
Yes.
In the best of circumstances, it takes parents a while to make the leap.
Yeah, having grown up with a gay brother who took quite a while to come out, one of the things that struck me as we were reading this letter and thinking, he's guilty when he identifies himself as guilt. He's ruled so much by guilt. Well, when you grow up, especially in a family as he did, knowing probably from an early age that he's gay and knowing that that's not something he should be, then that's guilt that's internalized, as George was pointing out, for many, many years. And I think this is completely irrational, but it's also almost inevitable. He was born gay, and yet probably some part of him for many years was saying, or at least for the early years, this can't be the case because I know that's not acceptable. That's completely unacceptable to my mother, who I love and am so devoted to. So this struggle, this internal conflict, it's rearing its head now and sort of coming to a head, but it's been around probably since he was a young child.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm really interested in the lives of gay kids because I think that you grow up as a gay kid in that you develop all kinds of defense mechanisms and a sensitivity towards where you're safe. And, I think there's much that happens to gay children that hasn't been explored very well. But I'm less concerned about actually whether he's going to tell his mother, because this situation is not going to change.
Yeah.
Whether he tells
Right.
her or not.
Right.
He's still got, X number of years of guilt and internalized homophobia that he's
Exactly.
dragging around. And that's what he has to work on.
Yes, thank you.
That's my feeling.
Yeah. And it's not that it's not an important thing whether he tells his mother, because that's the person, it sounds like, who he's closest to in his life. And all of what we talked about before really prevails and applies here. But the thing that is underneath that is his guilty one has been carrying around this guilt about being who he is for years. And you're, I think, very wise to say he's got to manage his expectations, because the fantasy that Cheryl set out quite beautifully is, well, this will help relieve him of some of that guilt. But we can't guarantee that that's going to be the outcome. In the end, he's the only one who can let himself off the hook for being who he is.
Yeah. Odds are whatever his reaction, the reaction he gets from his mother, is not going to be that moment of closure that he dreams of.
Right.
He sounds, in reading this letter, like a deeply, especially for a 24-year-old, not to be ageist, but he sounds really thoughtful and self-reflective. For him to say, I know I'm an actor and this is a role that's been the hardest for me to carry off, that's like a very sophisticated form of self-awareness. He's already got that going for him, that he's already thought and processed and realized some of the possible rewards, but also risks of breaking this news to his mom. He's not in the dark in that sense.
I love that part of the letter, that perception of himself as actor. And that's one thing. Gay kids are actors.
Right.
We're actors and secret keepers. And these things that we take on really have such an impact on our emotional lives all through our lives. And one thing I realized when I came home to take care of my mother to this little town is that for all of these years, I had been two people. I had been the person I was in New York, this, at the quotes, in quotes, free person, and this person who I was when I came back, who was still, kind of acting in a childlike way, wanting to please and wanting to fill that role that my parents had, originally envisioned.
Yeah. I actually think all kids struggle with this, especially if they're gay or they're hiding a big secret, whatever it is. But that's the dynamic when we go home. It's suddenly we're the kid again.
Are you one person now, even in Paris, Missouri, George?
I think the publication of the book have been so open in the book, and I've received an awful lot of support from people here in the community.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's been really nice. But it's also, a lot of people come up to me in grocery stores and, they immediately begin to talk. These people who have no one to talk to. And, mothers in these small towns. This one mother who talked about her friends telling her that she was a terrible mother because her daughter was a lesbian.
Right. Wow. It's all the secret keepers. They're all around us.
Yeah, and this issue has not gone away, and it's still, it's better. It's a lot better. They can also turn on TV and see role models, but there is an enormous amount of negativity.
Or they can listen to you on Dear Sugar Radio.
That's right.
Well, we know that, of course, that will change everything.
That's right.
I just want to tell Guilty One that, he's also very, very concerned about not being there for his mother all the time when she's sick, and feeling that guilt. And I was only able to do this because of the way my life worked out. And, there's no perfect situation. We can't be perfect. We can only do what, we're able to do. And, I'm sure that he will find a way, or he can find a way, despite being away from his mother, to give her some things that she needs from him during her illness.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. All right. Well, thank you, George.
Thank you.
And we really appreciate your wise words.
Take good care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, George was lovely, and I think he gave guilty ones some pretty fantastic advice. And, there's nothing like hearing from people whose experiences really, echo your own. It was really powerful for me to hear what George has gone through in both, his return home, caring for his mother through her illness and old age, and also his journey as a gay man.
Yeah. When George was talking about all gay kids are actors in some way, it was immediately obvious to me, oh, why did this guy become an actor? Mm-hmm. It's no coincidence that he pursued acting because that's what he's been doing all his life. Now he's got to stop acting with his mom, or he's got to decide whether he's ready to really stop acting and not have any role and not prep the set or the scene and, actually just drop all the masks. So he doesn't necessarily have to game plan this.
Yeah.
This could happen or